When the sun vanished, it didn't go quietly. It was stolen, ripped from our sky like something hungry had taken a bite out of daylight itself. And in the pitch black that followed, the rules of our world changed. Sound became the only thing that mattered. Silence kept you alive, and one wrong noise meant you were already dead. Tonight, you'll hear the truth of what happened to our town, the screams, the disappearances, and the thing that moved in the darkness. This is how we learned that once the night came, it wasn't ever going to end.
Chapter 1.
Chapter 1. Don't trust the first night. The darkness didn't arrive the way night normally does. It fell sharply, unnaturally, like a curtain pulled down over the sky by an impatient hand. One moment, the sun hung over the quiet streets of Emberfield, warming the storefront windows and illuminating dust drifting lazily in the summer air. And in the next, without warning or dimming or transition, the world went black. Not dim, not dusky, black. For several long seconds, no one moved. Drivers let their cars roll to slow, confused stops. Pedestrians froze mid-step. A dog began barking wildly at the air, then whimpered, pressing itself against its owner's legs. Someone said it first, hesitant, almost embarrassed. "Power outage?" It was the obvious explanation, logical, comforting, the kind of answer people reach for when the world behaves in ways it shouldn't. But as the darkness settled, thick and suffocating as wet cloth, an unease moved through the town like a shared shiver. People reached for their phones, screens lit, but the light didn't travel far. It cut through no more than a small sphere around the device, swallowed instantly by the black. Flashlights behaved the same. Car headlights, too. It was as if the darkness wasn't darkness at all, but something living, something that ate light the same way a starving creature would devour food. Across Emberfield, the same words echoed in different voices, spoken under different breaths. We thought we had time. We were wrong. A few brave residents stepped out of their cars, waving their phones like torches. Others leaned out of shop doorways, calling out to friends, neighbors, anyone who might answer. But each voice felt too loud, too risky, carried away into the suffocating void like bait. Then came the first sound. A low, dragging scrape across asphalt, slow, heavy, as if something unfamiliar with its own limbs was learning how to move them. It came from the far end of Main Street, near the diner where the neon sign normally flickered pink against the evening sky, but now was nothing but a dead hum behind glass. People turned toward the sound, instinctively huddling closer together. The scrape stopped. The silence that followed was thick and swollen, almost pressurized, pushing in against eardrums. Then came another noise, a distant wail, thin and mournful, like a child calling from somewhere deep within a long tunnel. A few people flinched. One woman clasped her hand over her mouth. Phones came out again. Someone tried calling 911. Nothing. The call didn't even ring. The emergency line was simply gone. She tried twice more, then whispered into the dark. "It's not connecting, not even static." From somewhere in the black, something tapped on a window, softly. Then again, slow and rhythmic, as though testing the glass, as though deciding whether to enter. Along the sidewalk, someone muttered, Don't answer. Don't move." But it was too late. Curiosity is a fragile thing in the presence of terror. A man took a single step toward the sound. The darkness pulsed. Not visually, no. It was something deeper, a shift felt in the bones rather than seen with eyes, a faint vibration that moved through the pavement and up into legs, a tremor like the warning growl of a hidden beast. Another sound followed, breathless, sharp, too close. A teenage boy yelled from somewhere across the street, "Hello? Is someone there? I can't see anything." His voice cracked, echoing farther than it should have. Sound traveled strangely now, longer, broader, rippling out into the dark in unnatural ways. Every head turned, the tapping stopped, the dragging sound resumed, this time quicker. "Quiet," someone hissed. Don't talk. The night is listening." But the warning came too late. The boy shouted again, panicked. "Where is everybody?" A rustle, a rush, a shape impossible to describe because no light revealed it, but unmistakably large, impossibly fast. It moved with a velocity that shredded the silence. There was a single sharp gasp, cut off mid-breath, and then nothing. No footsteps, no struggle, no body hitting the ground. Just absence. As if the boy had been scooped out of the world, erased like chalk from a blackboard. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone sobbed silently. In the distant dark, something exhaled, long, low, wet. A whisper moved through the survivors in a shared, trembling breath. The night was listening. People began backing away, pressing against storefronts, cars, one another, clinging to anything that felt anchored. Some covered their mouths, others cupped their own breathing, terrified the sound alone would betray them. A lesson spread faster than the fear itself. Sound travels farther in the dark than you think, farther than it should, farther than anything human can follow. And the darkness always follows. One by one, the townspeople realized the truth. Don't trust the first night. It was only the beginning.
Chapter 2.
Chapter 2. The darkness isn't empty. The hours crawled by, though outside, the night stayed exactly the same, heavy, suffocating, unbroken. Emberfield had never known a darkness like this, a black so thick it felt like a physical thing, like velvet soaked in tar pressed against every window, every doorway, every inch of exposed skin. Inside the small cluster of buildings where survivors huddled, 2 shops, a bakery, and the shattered remains of a clinic. They whispered, afraid even their breath would be heard. Phones lay dead, radios hissed with static, and still the darkness pressed against the glass, waiting. It didn't take long for them to notice the distortions. They appeared first at the edges, shifts in the black, subtle twitches like a curtain moved by a breeze no one could feel, a shape leaning just outside the cone of someone's dim flashlight, a swelling shadow near the alleyway behind the bakery, a reflection in a window that didn't match the person standing there. People blinked, rubbed their eyes, looked again. The distortions remained. Formless at first, just suggestions, an arm too long, a head tilted too sharply, a body that didn't stand quite right, flickers that vanished the moment someone tried to focus. But all through the night the whispers grew. Something was in there with us. And the more they said it, the more it felt true. It wasn't imagination, not some mass hallucination. They all described the same silhouette, a tall figure with a hunched posture, limbs tapering to thin, jointed points, eyes that weren't eyes, but brighter patches of darkness, like holes punched through the void. No one had seen it clearly, but everyone knew what it looked like. Across the cramped room of the bakery, a small group debated using the generator. It was old, noisy, and temperamental, but it held the promise of something precious. Light. Real light. The kind that didn't rely on batteries or delicate screens. "We can't stay blind," one man whispered, gripping the metal handle of the generator. "If there's something out there, we need to see it coming." Others protested. "The noise will draw them. We don't know what they are. What if sound is the only thing keeping them still?" The man didn't care. Fear often makes bravery look like desperation. Minutes later, with a few cautious pulls of the cord, the generator sputtered to life. Its hum vibrated through the floorboards, a low rumble that made the windows tremble. A spotlight flicked on, harsh, white, powerful, and finally cut into the darkness outside the bakery doors. For a moment, the light held. For a moment, hope returned. And then the distortions twitched. It was small at first, barely noticeable, a shift in a shadow along the edge of the building opposite them, a ripple like something moving behind a sheet of obsidian glass. Someone gasped. The generator hiccuped, the spotlight flickering. "Don't point it at them," a woman hissed. "They don't want to be seen." But the man holding the spotlight ignored her, slowly directing the beam toward the shape lurking in the void. The light reached it and died. Not flickered, not dimmed, died. The entire spotlight went dark with a sharp electric pop, as if the darkness itself had swallowed it whole. The generator sputtered, coughing violently. Everyone froze, the hum dropping in pitch, rattling metal on metal. Then something moved, not away, toward them. A slow, deliberate sound, like something dragging a limb across pavement, but with weight behind it. A scrape, followed by a thud, then another scrape, closer this time. The survivors backed away instinctively, some muffling their own whimpers with their hands. The man with the spotlight lowered it, trembling. The shape twitched again, clearer now, shifting just beyond the reach of human vision. Even without the light, they felt its attention, cold, ancient, patient, and drawn to the hum. The machine's vibrating motor seemed to call to it, like a beacon. The shadow leaned forward, its form stretching unnaturally, angling its head as though trying to listen more closely. "It hears it," someone whispered. No, it feels it." The generator let out a final metallic screech. The motor stalled. The hum stopped. Instantly, the shape retreated, dissolving back into the darkness with a fluid, silent glide. For several heartbeats, no one spoke, no one breathed. Then slowly, fear coalesced into understanding. Light didn't protect them. Light didn't repel the creatures. Light didn't mean safety. In Emberfield, light was merely another noise, another vibration for the darkness to feed on. As the reality sunk in, a new rule whispered through the survivors, passed from shaking lips to shaking ears. Light doesn't protect you, only silence does. It was a truth they felt in their bones, as heavy as the night pressing against the glass. A truth that meant the first night had only been a warning. The darkness wasn't empty. It never had been. And now it knew they were there.
Chapter 3.
Chapter 3. If you hear breathing, you're already too late.
The night settled over Emberfield like a living creature, breathing, shifting, listening. The survivors had begun to understand that sound meant danger, that movement attracted the shapes lurking just beyond sight. But what none of them expected was that the darkness would learn to breathe back. It happened first in the clinic. Hours had passed, though outside the night remained frozen, endless, as a handful of survivors crowded into the narrow hallway lined with medical charts and overturned metal trays. The air smelled of antiseptic and cold steel, mixed with the sour bite of fear. Every few minutes, someone whispered, "Stay quiet, stay still," as if repeating it might keep the darkness from remembering them. Then from behind the supply closet door came the faintest sound. Not movement, not a scrape, not a tap. A breath. A soft exhale, slow and deliberate, like someone standing inches from the door with their mouth hovering over the crack. At first the group dismissed it. Someone's imagination, a draft, settling pipes. Their nerves were stretched too thin. But the breath continued, long and controlled, pushing air through the wood as though whoever, or whatever, was behind the door was practicing the art of being human. The youngest survivor, a girl named Mira, leaned closer, tilting her ear toward the sound. Another breath. Closer. Warmer. Her eyes widened. "Someone's in there," she mouthed silently, but an older woman shook her head violently, grabbing Mira's arm with trembling fingers. "Don't move. Don't breathe back." The mantra had spread through the survivors like a superstition, but one born from experience. They had learned the rules of the night by watching others break them. Mira froze, her breath catching. The hallway filled with silence so complete it felt brittle, as if one wrong sound would shatter it. Then the breathing on the other side of the door changed. It mirrored them. If someone inhaled sharply, it inhaled sharply. If someone stifled a gasp, it stuttered just the same. A perfect mimic. Only too perfect, too precise, too eager. Mira backed away, heart thundering, hands shaking violently. Someone reached toward the door, but another survivor caught their wrist before they could touch it. The door rattled softly, just once, a gentle reminder that whatever breathed on the other side was not trapped, merely waiting. Later, witnesses would describe the same sensation. It felt like the darkness itself had lungs. That night, the rule spread further. Don't move, don't breathe back. It became a desperate whisper traded from person to person as they barricaded themselves inside the bakery and clinic. The walls were thin, and the night pressed against them like a predator, flattening its body before the pounce. But the breathing did not stay confined to the closet. By the next hour, others heard it too, behind the overturned counter, inside the bathroom stall, right beside their bedrolls. Soft at first, barely audible, then closer, then closer. Some froze fast enough to survive, biting down on their own tongues, squeezing their ribs tight to hold the air hostage inside their lungs. They stayed still until their vision blurred, until spots danced across their eyes. Those who didn't freeze, didn't stay. A panicked man gasped too loudly, his chest heaving in terror, and in an instant, something lunged out of the dark, unseen but unmistakably massive. It snapped him backward into the hallway so fast that the others didn't even see the shape, only the empty space where he had stood a heartbeat earlier. A guttural inhale echoed afterward, satisfied. The breathing grew, spreading like a contagion, as if every door, every corner, every inch of shadow was now exhaling softly. One witness, hands shaking, face wet with tears, explained what she heard moments before her partner vanished. There were two breaths, mine and something else, trying to match me, trying to trick me into thinking I wasn't alone. She shivered violently. It was learning me. The survivors were unraveling. Sleep became a luxury none could afford. Many tried to take turns keeping watch, but whenever someone drifted even slightly, a breath would slip close to their ear, cold, damp, invasive, and always followed by silence, a waiting silence, a silence that demanded they stay quiet too. On the far side of town, in a small, crumbling house near the woods, an elderly man named Harlan lived alone. He had heard the breathing long before the others. He had seen the distortions watching from his window before the darkness even reached his street. By the time the survivors found him, his furniture was overturned, his windows cracked inward, and his floorboards littered with chalk dust. He had covered every wall with frantic markings, warnings, diagrams, symbols. But one message appeared over and over again, scrawled so deeply that the chalk had carved grooves into the plaster. If you hear it breathe, it has already chosen you. He sat on the floor trembling, eyes unfocused, as if listening to a voice no one else could hear. When they approached him, he raised a shaking finger to his lips. Don't breathe. Don't breathe back. Outside, through the shattered window, the darkness seemed to lean closer, waiting.
Chapter 4.
Chapter 4. The Town That Forgot Its Own Name. For a time, the survivors believed they understood the rules. Don't make noise. Don't breathe back. Don't look too long at the shapes that twitched at the edge of the dark. But the night in Emberfield had deeper intentions than hunting. It wanted to change. Hours passed, hours they could not measure except by the aching in their limbs and the burn in their eyes. Yet outside, the darkness clung to the town like a second skin. And slowly, quietly, almost politely, it rearranged things. The first sign came at dawn, except dawn never arrived. A man named Grayson emerged from the bakery's back room carrying a worn leather map of Emberfield. He slammed it onto the counter, spreading it out beneath the dim lantern. He slammed it onto the counter, spreading it out beneath the dim lantern. Look, he whispered, pointing to the streets. This isn't right. The map was detailed, marked with decades of familiar routes, Pine Street, Orchard Lane, the looping intersection near the school. He had traced them 1,000 times in his life. But now, the ink looked wrong. Edges blurred, intersections curved into places they shouldn't, and where the names of streets should have been, there were smudges, long, sweeping erasures, like something had dragged a thumb across the page until the letters faded into nothing. Pine Street was now P Street. Orchard Lane had become O blank Lane blank. And the school's location, the place where dozens of children once laughed and studied, was nothing but an empty shape, its label erased completely. The survivors stared in silence. It's not the map, one woman whispered. It's the town. She was right. Because when they stepped outside, quiet as dust, tense as prey, they saw the same distortions in the real world. Landmarks they'd known since childhood had shifted. A house that should have been blue was now gray. A fence that once bordered a yard now cut directly through someone's driveway. And worst of all, the streets looped. No matter which direction they walked, the survivors always returned to the same intersection.
They tested it, marked lampposts with chalk, scratched arrows into the pavement, whispered plans to one another as they tried again and again. Yet every route, every single path led them back to the intersection. Mira whispered to Grayson, "This is wrong. We're walking in circles." Not circles, spirals, tightening, pulling them inward. A cold dread settled over the group. The town was rewriting itself. They saw more proof as they ventured deeper into the warped streets. Storefront signs missing letters, church doors half sunk into the pavement, a schoolyard where trees grew in unnatural, geometric patterns, perfect squares, perfect spacing, like something trying to imitate nature but failing to understand it. The survivors stopped at the school's front entrance, or what used to be the front entrance. The sign above the door once read Emberfield Elementary. Now it said E.M. blank Field blank E.L.M. blank T blank Y. The missing letters were not chipped away or vandalized. They were gone, cleanly deleted, as if they'd never existed. Mira stepped closer, tracing the outline where the B should have been. The letters aren't broken. They're just missing. As she spoke, a faint scraping sound echoed from inside the building, too rhythmical to be random, too steady to be wind. No one dared approach. A minor relief came when they reached the church, its tall steeple piercing upward like a skeletal finger. For a moment they hoped the sacred place might have resisted the darkness. But the church was worse. The stained glass windows, once filled with vibrant colors, had turned monochrome, black on black, shades of shadow. Even the image of the painted angel seemed to have been erased. Only wings remained, stretching across the panes like claws. The sign on the church lawn once read, "Welcome to Emberfield. God watches over us." Now it read, "We, O Ember, watch us." The survivors backed away. Something about the missing letters, about the holes where identity used to be, felt predatory, as if the darkness wasn't erasing the town, but digesting it, swallowing its history, its meaning, its name. When they returned to the clinic, the elderly man Harlan was sitting against the wall, scratching shaky marks into the wood with a dull piece of chalk. He didn't look up when they entered. "The town, it's not disappearing," he rasped, chalk squeaking. He drew a crooked circle, then another inside it, a spiral. "It's becoming part of the night." The survivors exchanged horrified looks. Harlan kept drawing. Names first, places next, memories last. His chalk snapped. He didn't stop. "The town is forgetting itself, and when it forgets everything, it will forget us." Outside, the distorted streets shifted again. Something creaked, something groaned, something moved like a city exhaling as its shape changed once more. The darkness leaned closer, and Emberfield, piece by piece, forgot its own name.
Chapter 5.
Chapter 5. Silence is the only safe place left. Silence became the town's new language, not by choice, not by discipline, but by fear, raw, primal, animal fear. Every sound in Emberfield was a risk now, a loose stone, The rustle of fabric, even a sharp inhale could send unseen shapes sliding closer from the darkness. The survivors learned quickly. Sound was not just dangerous. Sound was a summons. So they adapted with desperate precision. Hours passed. Though outside, the night stayed exactly the same. No dawn, no shift in sky, just a perpetual void pressing against the boarded windows of the clinic and bakery where the survivors sheltered. Inside, communication transformed. Voices were used only when necessary, and only in whispers so faint they barely stirred the air. For everything else, they built a new system. Trembling hand gestures, frantic pointing, and a set of tapping patterns created by Mira and Grayson. 2 taps for yes, 1 tap for no, 3 taps for danger. A single slow sweep of a hand meant stop, don't move. Wordless language filled with urgency. Silence kept us alive, they reminded each other constantly, scribbling it on scraps of paper, mouthing it across the room, tracing it with fingers onto dusty floors. Silence kept us alive. But silence also suffocated. Each person carried the weight of unspoken fear, unspoken grief, unspoken questions about the loved ones they had lost or left behind. But to speak was to die. And so all emotion lived behind clenched teeth and trembling hands. The survivors' temporary sanctuary was a soundproof basement beneath the bakery. Old insulation lined the walls, layers of thick carpeting muffled footsteps. Heavy metal shelving barricaded the door. It wasn't safe. Nothing in Emberfield was safe anymore. But it was the closest thing to a heartbeat's worth of safety the group had found. Down in that dim, muffled space, they kept lanterns low and breaths shallow. People's faces looked pale in the flickering glow, drawn tight with exhaustion. The smell of flour and mold clung to their clothes, a reminder of the world that existed before the darkness swallowed everything. But every trip outside the basement was a gauntlet of terror. Whether to scavenge water, gather supplies, or find other survivors, anyone who dared to leave walked like a ghost. Slow, deliberate, placing feet with surgical precision. A dropped coin, a snapped twig, a single cough. Fatal. It didn't take much. Just the faintest noise. Just enough to let the dark know you existed. Grayson learned that firsthand. On one of their runs, only a few steps from the bakery door, he dropped a pen from his pocket. It hit the ground with the softest click. Barely audible, but in the oppressive quiet of Emberfield, it was deafening. The survivors froze where they stood, hearts pounding in a synchronized panic. From the blackened street ahead, a low vibration pulsed, like something enormous shifting its weight. Then, movement. Fast. Too fast. A towering shape swept across the distant intersection, just a suggestion of height, of angles, of jagged limbs. Nobody saw details, they only felt its presence like a pressure carving into their ribs. The group scrambled back inside, locking the door without a sound, breaths held until their lungs burned. Only when the shape's steps faded did they allow themselves tiny, quiet exhales. Grayson learned didn't sleep for hours afterwards. He kept replaying the moment the pen fell, the soft clink, the way the dark responded instantly, hungrily. Silence kept us alive. But silence could not erase fear. The worst moment, though, came with the child. Her name was Leela, 6 years old, small enough to curl up in a blanket like a cocoon. She had been quiet for days, clinging to her mother's shirt, wide-eyed and trembling. Children, however, are made of instinct, and instinct never stays contained. Late one night, as the survivors slept in uneasy shifts, a faint humming drifted through the basement. A soft tune, broken, wavering, almost subconscious, escaping Leela's lips as she dreamed. Her mother reached for her immediately, covering her mouth with shaking hands. But it was too late. Something heard. A massive weight slammed against the basement door with a force that cracked wood and sent dust raining from the ceiling. Shelves rattled. Lanterns flickered. The survivors slammed their backs against the door, pressing with all their strength as something outside pushed back. Slowly, deliberately, testing the barrier. A wet exhale seeped through the gap beneath the door. No words were spoken, but a collective thought flooded them all. It wants the sound. It wants the child. The creature leaned its full weight into the door again, warping the hinges, bending metal, twisting screws until they groaned in agony. Leela whimpered, silently this time, but her tears fell fast and heavy. Mira pressed her palm over the child's shaking hands, mouthing, "Silence. Silence kept us alive." The pressure outside built. Built. Then slowly, it stopped. The weight lifted, the breathing faded, the presence receded like a tide crawling back into the ocean of darkness. Only when minutes, maybe hours, passed in complete stillness did the survivors let themselves collapse to the floor, trembling, clutching one another in relief and terror. Silence saved them, but the cost was carved onto their faces. They understood something new that night, something worse than the creatures, or the distortions, or the endless dark. The darkness wanted them quiet, only so it could hear them better. And it was always listening.
Chapter 6.
Chapter 6. They hunt what they can hear. The creatures had always moved in the dark, hidden inside the thick, swallowing black that clawed to Emberfield like a living shroud. But until now, the survivors hadn't understood the pattern, the intent, the horrifying intelligence behind those jagged shapes that stalked the streets. It began with listening. Hours passed. Though outside, the night stayed the same, unchanging, eternal, suffocating. But as the survivors crouched in the shadowed remains of the clinic, they began to notice something new. The creatures paused. Not randomly, not restlessly, but with purpose. Whenever a noise drifted across the town, even something as small as a foot brushing against concrete, the creatures froze, as though the sound struck them like electricity. Their bodies, barely visible as distortions in the void, stiffened. Heads tilted in unnatural, too sharp angles. Limbs spread like antennae. Listening. Grayson was the first to piece it together. He pressed his ear against the wooden clinic door, whispering so softly the air barely moved. "They don't see you. They hear you." The phrase repeated among the survivors like a heartbeat. "They don't see you. They hear you." Outside, the silhouettes prowled with eerie precision. Every footstep was calibrated, every pause intentional. Their movements were like a twisted form of echolocation, sound-born hunting. Whenever a noise echoed, the creatures triangulated instantly. Tap, pause, rush. The rush was the worst. It was too fast, too sudden, like something being unspooled from the darkness in a single violent pull. A blur of shadow, a ripple of air pressure, then the sickening silence that followed. "Like arrows," Mira whispered once, "but alive." The survivors' only defense was absolute quiet, and even that was fragile. One night,
the group attempted to move from the clinic to an abandoned hardware store, hoping to find tools to reinforce their barricades. They traveled like ghosts, bare feet, slow steps, breaths held in trembling lungs. Halfway across the street, the worst happened. A rusted gutter pipe, loosened by age and the weight of the darkness, broke free and clattered onto the pavement. The metallic clang echoed across the block, sharp as a gunshot. Freezing wasn't enough. The survivors watched the darkness ripple. Shapes gathered from every direction, tall, skeletal silhouettes with limbs that bent where no limb should bend. Their heads snapped toward the sound. They paused for one impossibly long second. Then they moved. They didn't run. They launched, like the night itself had exploded into motion. The survivors scrambled back toward the clinic, but it was clear the creatures would reach them before they made it through the doors. Panic surged. Whimpers threatened to escape their throats. Then a man broke from the group. His name was Caleb, a quiet, sturdy man with heavy boots and a grief-lined face. Before anyone could stop him, he sprinted toward the overturned trash cans at the edge of the sidewalk. And he kicked one. Hard. The metal can clanged and spun. Caleb grabbed another and slammed it against the ground with all his strength. The echoes rang like thunder. Every creature stopped. Heads turned. The darkness pivoted toward Caleb. He smiled, tight, trembling, but real. Behind him, the survivors slipped through the clinic door. Then, the creatures moved. Caleb barely managed to lift the third trash can before the first shape hit him, an eruption of shadow and force that knocked him into the street. His scream tore through the night, high, raw, terrified. But the creatures didn't stop at the sound. They mimicked it. As Caleb vanished beneath the mass of twisting limbs, the darkness around him began to echo his scream. Warped, stretched, too high or too low, almost human, but not quite. The copies multiplied, overlapping, until the entire street rang with an inhuman chorus of Caleb's agony. The survivors covered their ears, trembling inside the clinic. The walls rattled. Someone sobbed silently. When the screaming finally stopped, the echoes continued a moment longer. Quiet, desperate mimicry, fading like dying embers. Then silence. The kind that could break a human mind. The survivors didn't speak for nearly an hour. They barely breathed. But slowly, the terrifying truth formed between them. The creatures weren't just reacting to sound. They were learning it. Later that night, another noise drifted to the clinic door. A baby crying. Soft at first, then louder. Wavering. Needy. The survivors froze. Everyone knew there were no babies left in Emberfield. The crying continued, closer, sharper, echoing through the warped streets. Then came a new voice, a woman's whisper. "Help, please, someone help." Mira curled into herself, covering her ears. "It's not real! It's not real!" Grayson pressed his back to the door, hands shaking violently. "They're mimicking us." The creatures passed by the clinic windows, slow, thoughtful shadows, circling, searching, whispering voices stolen from the living and the dead. Sometimes they repeated the survivors' own names. Sometimes they mimicked the exact cadence of someone lost earlier in the night. Sometimes they whispered things no one should know. "They don't see you.
They hear you. And now they spoke you too.
Chapter 7.
Chapter 7. The survivors didn't stay human. The darkness had lasted too long. Too many hours, days, perhaps, had passed without even a hint of dawn. In Emberfield, time no longer behaved the way it should. Clocks stopped. Phones died. Sleep came in disjointed, panicked bursts that left the survivors more exhausted than before. And slowly, without anyone noticing at first, the people began to change. It started with the eyes. In the cramped, flickering safety of the bakery basement, the survivors gathered around a dim lantern, trading scraps of food, sharing blankets, trying not to hear the creatures whispering their names outside. Mira blinked at Grayson from across the room. Your eyes," she mouthed silently, pointing. He frowned, barely a twitch of expression, and reached up to touch beneath his eyelid. "What about them?" he whispered. "You're seeing better." It was true. Grayson could see in the near blackness with unnatural clarity. He could pick out faces in the shadows, read expressions without light, track movement in the corners of the room where lantern glow didn't reach. And he wasn't the only one. Children stared through the dark like cats. Adults saw flickers in places where there should have been nothing. Shadows took shape, not because they moved, but because the survivors could perceive them. "The darkness changes you," Harlan murmured from his corner, chalk-stained fingers trembling around a scrap of wood. He said it often now, like a mantra, like a confession. The others repeated it silently. "The darkness changes you." Some changes were subtle. Some were horrifying. Hunger faded. Sleep cycles collapsed. People paced restlessly, unable to stay still for long without feeling watched. Worst of all was the growing sensitivity. Grayson could hear heartbeats. Mira could smell fear, literally smell it, sharp and sour in the air. Leela, the humming child, could sense when a creature was nearby long before it reached the house. The darkness wormed into them like a parasite, like an invitation, like it had been waiting for this. Then came the speech loss. It happened to 3 survivors first. People who had remained silent the longest, communicating only with taps and gestures. When Grayson finally whispered something to them, gently, carefully, they all stared back as if the words were meaningless. Their throats worked, but nothing human emerged. Instead, they clicked. Soft, rhythmic, insect-like. At first, the others thought it was fear, shock making them mute. But the clicking had patterns, tone, intent. One survivor responded to another's clicks with an almost melodic rhythm, like they were discovering a new form of language. Their eyes shone too brightly in the dim lantern light. "The darkness changes you," Harlan whispered again, rocking gently. His chalk scraped across the floor rhythmically, a sound that made everyone flinch. Hours later, 2 of the clickers wandered away. Not far, just outside the bakery door. When they returned, a full hour later, they could not explain where they had gone. Their clothes were damp, their hands cold, their eyes too wide. "What happened?" Mira mouthed. They only clicked softly, in unison. Later that night, one of the survivors vanished completely. No one heard them leave. No one saw the door open. Only a trail of footprints remained,
leading straight into the darkness, as if the person had walked willingly into the void. The darkness changes you. But the worst change came from a man named Rowan. Quiet, steady Rowan, who rarely spoke, who had kept to himself even before the night swallowed the world. He began waking at strange hours, gasping for breath, clutching his skull like something inside was screaming. He told Grayson in a shaking whisper that he heard voices, not human voices, not the mimicked cries or stolen screams the creatures used to lure them, but the creatures' thoughts. At first, no one believed him. How could they? Madness was easier to accept than telepathy. But Rowan described things in perfect detail, things he could not possibly have known. He recited the pattern the creatures used to triangulate sound. He explained how they moved through the darkness without seeing. He whispered descriptions of their intelligence, their hunger, their purpose. Most chilling of all, he knew their fear. "They're afraid of us," Rowan said one night, his voice quivering. "Not all of us, just some." "How do you know?" Mira asked. Rowan hesitated. His breath hitched, and then he said it. "Because some of them used to be human." Silence filled the basement like water, heavy and suffocating. "No," Grayson whispered. "No, Rowan, you—" "I can hear them," Rowan insisted, voice breaking. "I can hear their memories. They remember streets, names, families." His hands trembled violently. "They remember being us." Outside, the faint sound of clicking drifted past the window, the unmistakable rhythm of the three survivors who could no longer speak. Grayson's blood ran cold. "They aren't lost," Rowan whispered. "They're changing. And soon," he added, barely audible, "we will, too." A soft click echoed behind him. Then another. Closer. The lantern flickered. The basement door creaked. The survivors held their breath as the shadows swayed. The darkness, patient and hungry, leaned in and waited to see who would change next.
Chapter 8.
Chapter 8. The Path Out Isn't Really a Path. The rumor began as a whisper, quiet, desperate, carried through Emberfield like the last breath of hope. Someone claimed there was a trail leading out of the town, a narrow dirt path at the forest's edge, one that hadn't existed before the darkness fell. A way out. People clung to the idea like drowning survivors grasping driftwood. But by now the survivors had learned something important. In Emberfield, the night lies. Still, the rumor was too tempting to ignore. Hours passed, though outside, the night stayed the same. The creatures prowled the streets. The town continued to rearrange itself, and the survivors, exhausted and terrified, considered the impossible. "We should check the trail," Grayson whispered one night, voice barely audible. Mira shook her head. But Rowan, the man who heard the creature's thoughts, sat up straight, eyes unfocused. "The night bends space," he whispered. "It folds it, twists it. The trail isn't leaving Emberfield, it's circling it." But no one understood what he meant, not then. Later they would. They set out at dawn, if dawn existed anymore, with only a faint lantern wrapped in thick cloth to dull the glow. The world around them lay unnaturally still, the air stagnant, tasting faintly of metal and rotting leaves. The forest at the edge of town looked different now, dense, taller than before,
branches twisting in strange patterns, like skeletal fingers reaching inward. But there it was, a path, narrow, winding, leading away. Or so it seemed. Grayson took the first step. The earth felt soft, almost sponge-like beneath his boots, as though the ground itself was breathing quietly. The others followed, silent and alert. Minutes passed, the woods closed around them. The path narrowed. "Stay close," Mira mouthed. "No noise." They walked in utter silence, their breaths shallow, their bodies tense. Leaves rustled overhead, though there was no wind. Periodically, a distant groan echoed deep in the forest, like old wood shifting or something enormous rolling over in its sleep. Still, the survivors pressed forward. This had to lead somewhere. But then came the first sign. A small carving on a tree, a crude X cut into the bark. Grayson frowned. "I made that mark." "But we're heading straight," Mira whispered, panic creeping into her voice. They walked another 20 paces. Another X. Not the same tree, but an identical mark. Then they turned around. The path behind them had changed. It bent sharply left, though they'd walked in a straight line. The forest shifted behind them, branches rearranging like a living maze, repositioning one piece at a time. Rowan pressed a hand against a trunk, feeling its grain. "The night bends space," he whispered. The others stared at him confused. "It's not letting us leave." Still, they pushed on, stubbornly, fearfully, foolishly. Another carving, another tree, another loop. They tried a different tactic, marking trees as they walked. Mira used a knife to carve circles. Grayson cut diagonal lines. Rowan traced runes he claimed would anchor the path. For a moment, it seemed to work. 3 trees marked in succession. Forward movement, real progress. Then the forest groaned. A heavy, deep, ancient sound that shook dust loose from the branches and made the earth hum beneath their feet. When they turned around, the marks were gone. Or worse, they were wrong. A circle became a triangle. A diagonal became a zigzag. The rune twisted into symbols none of them recognized. "These weren't ours," Mira mouthed. "Someone else carved them." "No," Rowan corrected softly. "They carved themselves." The survivors froze. The forest around them seemed to breathe, swelling and shrinking subtly, branches curling like ribs around a living creature. Grayson took a shaky step backward. But when he did, the ground rippled, like fabric stretched too thin. "We're not moving," he whispered. "We only think we are." The trail forked suddenly ahead. 3 directions where there should have been one. The paths branched off like veins, leading into deeper, darker parts of the forest. "Which one is real?" someone mouthed. Rowan's expression twisted. None of them were real. The forest rearranged again. Branches shifted, leaves rustled without wind. The air thickened until it felt viscous, heavy, wrong. The survivors turned around. The path behind them had vanished entirely. Now there was only forest and darkness, and the faint, distant sound of something moving through the trees. Slow, deliberate, purposeful. "We have to go back," Mira mouthed. But which way was back? The forest groaned again. The ground pulsed. A branch snapped, not by accident, but by intention. Something was coming. A hush fell over the trees, a predatory silence.
The survivors fled, running in what they hoped was the direction of town. Their steps were muffled by the soft, shifting earth. The forest stretched unnaturally around them, paths melting, rearranging like ink in water. A minute later, they stumbled out onto a street. Relief surged until they realized where they were. The middle of Emberfield, the exact center of town, nowhere near the forest's edge. They'd been gone for hours. Or seconds. No one knew. Mira collapsed against a wall, gasping. Grayson stared at his hands, convinced they weren't his own. Rowan simply whispered, hollow and terrified, "The night bends space." The survivors looked back toward the forest. The path was gone. Maybe it never existed. Or worse, maybe it was waiting for someone more desperate. And Emberfield, restless and shifting, waited with it.
Chapter 8. Chapter 9. The sun was never ours to begin with. The church stood at the far end of Emberfield like a wounded monument, its steeple crooked, its stained glass drained of color, its doors half sunken into the crooked earth. The survivors avoided it at first. Holy places felt too fragile now, too thin to offer protection against an endless night. But when the path in the forest betrayed them, and when Emberfield's shifting streets brought them back to the same intersection again and again, they found themselves instinctively drawn to the only building that still felt untouched by human hands. Inside, the air was cold and dry, thick with dust and old prayers. The scent of wood rot mixed with candle wax long hardened into brittle drips down the altar. Mira swept her lantern slowly across the room. Shadows bent strangely along the walls. "There's something here," she mouthed. "Something old." Hours passed, though outside the night stayed the same. The church's interior seemed frozen, trapped in a moment abandoned decades ago. And then Rowan saw the markings. They covered the back wall of the sanctuary, carvings etched deep into the wood, almost clawed into it. They didn't look like Latin, didn't look like any written language, more like symbols that wanted to be letters but failed halfway through, caught between meaning and instinct. Grayson brushed dust from the carvings. "What is this?" he whispered. Rowan stepped closer, his pupils dilated, his breath shallow. "It's not a warning," he murmured. "It's a confession." Mira leaned in. "From who?" Rowan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because beneath the carvings, half buried behind a fallen hymn board, they found a journal. Weathered, water-stained, bound in cracking leather. The handwriting inside was desperate, slanted, frantic, as though the author wrote only when there was enough light to see by. The first entry chilled them more than any creature ever had. The sun was a privilege. The survivors exchanged uneasy glances. Rowan's hands trembled as he turned the page. The journal belonged to Father Heron, the church's priest, the man who had vanished years before Emberfield fell into darkness. Page after page, he wrote of strange sounds beneath the church floor, of waking to whispers that mimicked his own voice, and of the shadows stretching unnaturally long during winter sermons. But the most disturbing entries were about the land itself. "This place is a boundary, a seam, a place where light leaks into a world it was never meant to touch." Rowan read aloud softly, as though the darkness might overhear. "We do not own the sun," he whispered. "We were only borrowing it." The survivors stood frozen. Borrowing it from what? Or from whom? Grayson's voice cracked when he spoke. He believed the town shouldn't have daylight. Rowan turned another page. The sun retreats not because it sets, but because it remembers its true path. It shines here only out of mercy. Mira swept hardly. If the sun was borrowed, then the darkness, she whispered, is here to take it back. Rowan nodded slowly, and everything it touched. The next entries grew more frantic. Ink smudged, pages torn, words carved deep into the parchment as though Father Heron had tried to force his fear onto the paper. The creatures are not invaders. They are the original inhabitants. They walk by sound because the world that belongs to them was never meant to be seen. The survivors felt the church grow colder around them. "The darkness isn't the intruder," Grayson murmured. "We are." It was Mira who found the final pieces of the puzzle, hidden behind the altar, beneath warped boards pried loose with shaking hands. A small metal plaque, a rope, a broken bell hammer. The old church bell, rusted and cracked, lay on its side behind the altar like a fallen guardian. Rowan knelt beside it, fingers brushing the dented surface. "That's why the creatures stayed away from the church before," he whispered. "The bell." Grayson frowned. "A bell keeps them out." "No," Rowan said softly. "It kept the boundary intact." The journal explained it all. The bell's purpose wasn't symbolic. It wasn't tradition. It wasn't ritual. It was containment. Father Heron had rung it every morning, not to call the congregation, but to reinforce the barrier between the human world and the world of the creatures. Each chime strengthened a seam that was never meant to stay open. But years ago, the bell cracked, and Heron, consumed by fear, guilt, or something darker, stopped ringing it. The boundary weakened. The daylight leaked. The creatures noticed. The sun was a privilege, and Emberfield had failed to protect it. A soft creak echoed through the church hall. The survivors stiffened. From the shadows beyond the altar, a figure emerged, thin, hunched, its silhouette shifting like smoke. But as it stepped into the faint lantern glow, they saw a human face beneath the tattered robes. Father Heron, alive, or something like it. His voice scraped from his throat like bones grinding. "You never understood." His eyes glowed faintly in the dark. "It wasn't meant for us." Mira stepped back, heart pounding. What wasn't? His lips twisted into a trembling smile. "The light." The lantern flickered violently, shadows thickening. He lifted a shaking hand toward the broken bell. "When the ringing stopped," he whispered, "they remembered." The church trembled, its walls groaning. Outside, something massive shifted toward the building. Rowan stumbled backward, wide-eyed. "They're coming." Father Heron nodded slowly, with a terrible calm. "The rightful world is returning." The lantern died, and Emberfield held its breath.
Chapter 10.
Chapter 10. Run before the night remembers you. The lantern died. Darkness swept into the church like a rising tide, thick, suffocating, alive. The survivors felt it push against them, hard enough to steal their breath. Outside, something massive shifted, dragging itself closer with the weight of an entire world behind it. The creatures were converging. Rowan grabbed Mira's arm, fingers trembling. "Move," he mouthed. His voice wouldn't come. Fear had crushed it flat. Grayson fumbled for the exit, hands trailing along the worn pews. The wood felt wrong beneath his fingertips, soft, almost pulsing, like the church itself was breathing with the darkness. Father Heron stood motionless by the broken bell, his silhouette dissolving into the gloom. "You must run," he whispered hoarsely, "before it remembers you." Then he vanished, swallowed whole by the dark. The survivors didn't wait to question it. They pushed through the nearest door, stumbling into the cold night air. Except it wasn't night anymore. It was deeper. The darkness had thickened. Buildings sank into it like stones dropped into ink. Street lamps vanished mid-glow, their halos swallowed. Shadows bled outward from every corner, merging into a single, heaving mass. The town was collapsing inward, folding, spiraling, returning to whatever world it had been stolen from centuries before. And the creatures came with it. Their silhouettes gathered along rooftops, arcing over streets, unfurling across collapsing walls. Some crawled, some glided, some rose vertically as if pulled by unseen strings. But all of them turned in the same direction, toward the survivors. Rowan felt their attention like cold fingers pressed against the sides of his skull. Their thoughts, fragmented and hungry, whispered inside his mind, "We remember you. You belong to us. You were always ours." He staggered, clutching his head. "Go, now!" he hissed. "They know where we are!" Mira's heart hammered against her ribs, pounding so loud she feared the creatures could hear it. Grayson grabbed her hand and pulled her forward into the street. "Run!" he mouthed. "Don't stop! Don't speak!" The words became a rhythm, panicked, primal, a survival command echoing in their bones. Run, don't stop, don't speak. Behind them, Emberfield screamed. The sound wasn't human. It was the town itself, the buildings groaning as they folded inward, the earth cracking, the air distorted with violent pressure. Windows shattered without impact, doors twisted off hinges. The school collapsed into itself like a crumpled paper doll. Mira glanced back and immediately wished she hadn't. A shape taller than any tree hovered in the center of Main Street, spinning slowly. Its limbs stretched impossibly long, tracing lines across the dark sky. Its face, or what passed for one, shifted like melted wax, pulling expression after expression with no meaning behind any of them. And it was looking at them. Rowan shoved Mira forward, his breath shaking. "Don't look," he mouthed fiercely. "It sees through memory." The creatures surged. Dozens, maybe hundreds, slithered, crawled, sprinted through the thickening void. Their movements were soundless, their bodies bent and reformed in ways that broke every rule of anatomy. One brushed past a parked car. The metal folded like paper. The car vanished into shadow. "Faster!" Grayson mouthed, nearly dragging Mira off her feet. But the town didn't want them to leave. The pavement warped beneath their boots. Sidewalks stretched like taffy. Street intersections split in a wrong angle. Homes shifted sideways, rearranging into impossible shapes. The darkness bent the world around them, folding Emberfield into a maze with no beginning and no end. Mira stumbled. Rowan caught her. The ground vibrated beneath them. Not movement, not footsteps, but something deeper. A heartbeat. The town had a heartbeat, and it was accelerating. Grayson froze. "Mira," he whispered, barely able to form the words. "It's alive." Rowan shook his head.
It's remembering itself. The creatures screamed, a pitched, grating wail that tore through the air like metal ripping apart. They converged, forming a ring far behind the survivors, and then began tightening it. The group had only one option: forward. But what was forward? Where was safety? Where was anything? A faint breeze brushed their skin, cold, crisp, carrying no scent, no decay, no rot, no darkness, just wind. Mirret grabbed Grayson's sleeve and pointed. Follow the wind. They sprinted through the warped streets, following the faint vibration brushing against their faces. It felt like the town's last sympathetic gesture, a warning from whatever remained human in Emberfield. Or perhaps a lure. Rowan stumbled as the darkness pressed closer, whispering his name in a dozen stolen voices. Grayson pulled him up. "Don't listen," he mouthed. "Don't look back." They ran until their legs burned, until their throats squeezed shut, until the wind grew stronger, the only real sensation left in a dying world. And then the ground ended. A sharp edge, a cliff, a border where Emberfield simply stopped. Beyond it, endless black pulsed like a living ocean. Below it, nothingness. The creatures closed in behind them. Mira stared at the abyss. "What do we do?" she mouthed. Rowan swallowed hard. A realization dawned in his eyes, terrifying and resolute. He swallowed hard. A realization dawned in his eyes, terrifying and resolute. The darkness doesn't want to kill us. It wants to keep us, because it remembers us. He looked at the creatures, towering, shifting, whispering their names with perfect mimicry. They remember what they used to be, and they want us to join them. The ground shuddered violently. The edge began to crumble. Mira grabbed Rowan's hand. Grayson grabbed hers. 3 survivors, 1 edge, and the night closing in. Rowan took a breath. "Run," he whispered. A final repetition, a final plea. "Run before the night remembers you." The darkness lunged. The survivors jumped. And Emberfield, what remained of it, folded into the void.
The night didn't end for us. It changed us. It taught us that darkness is patient, darkness is ancient, and darkness never forgets what belongs to it. We learned that sound is a beacon, light is a lie, and silence is the only mercy left in a world swallowed whole. If you escape the night once, it will follow you. If you hear it breathe, you're already marked. And if the shadows around you feel thicker than they should, then you've already brought a piece of our town back with you. So listen carefully, stay silent, stay alert, and if the night calls your name, run before it remembers who you are. If you want more stories like this, don't let the darkness decide. Click subscribe, hit the bell, and stay with the light while you still can.